What's up, everyone? We are back and live with the Messenger Movement podcast. For those who don't know, I don't have a standard time that we go live, but people get really excited. There's like a surprise and delight of when we pop in the LinkedIn feed or the YouTube goes live or Facebook goes live. And we love live listeners. So you guys are always welcome to drop comments, give us a thumbs up, give Ashley a thumbs up who's in the house today. And I'm just grateful for the community of listeners that is here and specifically excited to share with you Ashley Freehan, who is here as not only a sister in Christ, as most of them are sisters and brothers in Christ, but also someone who is really invested in you when it comes to your work-life balance, when it comes to you operating in purpose, when it comes to this idea of being a mompreneur. And she's so passionate about allowing people to be and live a productive life while also doing the things that they're purposed to do and loving it in the process. So I'm excited to get into your story, Ashley, to learn more about you. I was just in the hot seat on her show, which is called The Purpose Gathering. You've got to download it today. And so I'm excited to see you in this limelight and the variation of the questions I've got quick firing to you today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a little faux pas in what we just said, because I accidentally, when you were on my podcast, I sent you the info for my old podcast that used to be called the Purpose Gathering Podcast. But it is now changed to be called the Organized Mompreneur. So it's a little bit more niche specific to who I speak to. But yeah, I realized that
we're still purposed.
Still purposed and grounded. Yeah. When I was looking for your information for my podcast, I was like, I don't see her responses. And it was because it was on my old.
Aha. No worries. I just had a name change too this year. So I totally get it. You still are in momentum and on purpose. So the Organized Mompreneur podcast, which I do like that it's so much more niche, right? Like we can really jump into that and allow people to say, yes, that's me. And that is me. So thanks for having me on. And I'm so excited to tune into more. But now your turn. I'm excited to learn your story. Tell us a bit about where you got started in this endeavor and kind of where that backstory of faith propelling purpose really came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been a photographer for 13 years, and I started as an everything photographer. Like you would ask me to do your pet photos. Yes. If you asked me to do your family photos, yes. Like anything and everything. I was like, I just want to be a photographer. And I started growing my business, like, actually, my daughter was born like when I decided to take it real, like I was like, okay, I'm not a hobbyist anymore. Like this is real. This is a business. So I have always had kids while trying to grow businesses. And so I started out as a photographer, and about 8 years in, it took me 8 years to realize that like something was missing. I was doing business alone, and I had no community around me that were moms and business owners. I had so many business owner friends in the photography and wedding industry space, which I actually ended up kind of branching into. And they all did not have kids. And I was like, okay, so they get the business, but they don't get the kid, family, motherhood aspect.
Which is
huge.
I had
huge. And I had so many mom friends, but they didn't own the business. And I was like,
they look like you have like 5 eyes. They're always like, what are you doing with your spare time?
Like, oh, that sounds really cool. They had no idea. And I was like, okay, this is terrible. Nobody gets this struggle between trying to raise a family, but grow a business. And I found myself one day, like crying in my closet. And I was like, who is going to take care of me? Like, I just had that pivotal moment where I was like, man, I'm taking care of everybody else, all of my clients, I'm taking care of my family. I'm raising humans. It's the hardest job in the world. And I'm like, literally nobody is taking care of me. And in that moment, I literally heard God speak to me, and he's like, I mean, if you don't advocate for your self-care, like no one else will. And I was just like, wow, it was such like this eye-opening moment. Like he spoke like, I'll be there for you. Right. But I also can't do it all for you. Like you have to, at some point, accept the responsibility to take care of yourself, and you're not. And it was over the next several months that I was really trying to figure out, like, man, I just need a community. Like I need some moms who own a business and who get the struggle, because it is so hard. And I'm sitting in my prayer time and I'm like journaling, and I hear God speak, like, you should create that community. And I was like, nope, I heard this wrong. Like, I did not. Nope. Like I ignored the call for so long
Oh.
until it was so loud that I was like, I can't not listen to the call. And so I went out on this journey of literally trying to put together an event. Like that's what I started with. I didn't have an audience. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have a community. I didn't have many followers unless they had hired me to do photos. And I was like, I don't know what this means. So I literally went on YouTube and I was like, how to plan an event.
Wow.
And it said, well, you probably need an audience. And I was like, yep. And they were like, you should probably pick a date. And I was like, yep. So I
Ah,
literally put on an event. I think I started planning in February and the event was in July.
wow.
And I had 30 women show up.
Great.
And from then on out, it's been me navigating this idea of like, how do I be a community founder? I turned into a coach at the same time. And
Yeah.
it's been this beautiful evolution of I started as a photographer, but I knew that was never the end. Like I
Yeah.
knew that was just the catalyst for this big next, which is the purpose gathering. So that's
So
it
cool.
in a nutshell. But
It
I'm sure
is.
there's more.
Well, there's so many layers to it that like it's a yes after another yes after another yes, but it's also so much attuning to the Lord on your needs
Yeah.
and his desire for you. And I can definitely raise my hand to just the journey of entrepreneurship can be very isolating,
Mm.
especially if the people in your close circle don't have any idea what you're doing or why you're working 80 hours now that you quit your 40-hour a week job and like you
Right.
can't turn it off and you love it so much and so you want to talk about it all the time but they don't get it and it can really kind of play with your mind like am I an abnormal? And yes you are. You are abnormal and that is okay. So I love that you went after that initially to just say I need community around me and God was
Mhm.
allowing you to do that. To do it as an event, it takes some gumption,
Yep.
right? I love that you did it in that capacity. I shared with you on my show that ours started as just a membership, and I didn't even know what a membership was. I didn't know
Mhm.
that I was ever going to be a coach. I just was like, hey, who wants to gather around a table twice a month? And that's what we
Yeah.
did. It just so happens that it was a membership. I just didn't know that. And so
Right.
sometimes we just say yes unknowingly, but then God comes through on the other side specifically and strategically to say, hey, this is how this works. And so I love that. I'm
Yeah.
curious with the people that you brought together, were they all moms and entrepreneurs? Was that the avatar
That
or
was the
photographers?
avatar.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And I think my tagline was like, how to juggle all the things.
Ah, yes. Yes.
So
That's so
it was
neat.
a 1-day event and there were 5 speakers, including myself. And we talked about all the various areas of like motherhood, marriage, self-care, business, like all the
Yes.
different topics into 1 day. And it was so powerful and jam-packed, but I still look back on it and I'm like, how did I even pull that off? I have
Right? Have
no
you done
idea.
it again? Have you done it again?
That was the only time, but I do have a new one coming up.
Uh-huh.
It's
Tell me,
like
tell
the
me.
Purpose Gathering Live
Ah,
2.0. This is what
yes.
I don't know what it's gonna be called yet, but
What's the
Purpose Gathering
variation of
Live.
time? When did that happen versus when is this happening? What's the gap?
So 2019 was my
Okay.
first event,
Okay.
and then I went down this, almost 5-year journey,
Yeah.
and the new event is happening in April of 2025.
All right. That's so exciting. I'm so excited for you. I'm so proud of you. And do you
Thank
have like
you.
a number of people that you're hoping that will be in the room?
So I'm hoping for 75 to 100.
Awesome. I love that.
Which is a little bit of a leap because I had
Yeah.
30 at the
Yeah.
first
It's a
one, but I've
double, if
also
not more.
grown my,
Of course.
my influence and my audience,
Yes.
over the past 5 years. So
So
I'm super
exciting.
excited about it.
And tell me how the process and evolution of the motherhood journey parallel to entrepreneurship has really evolved and like how you mother, what your kids know about what you do. What has that relationship been like?
Yeah. So I think like pre the founding of the Purpose Gathering. So pre 2019. So my daughter is now 13 and my son is 10.
Yep.
So she was born in 2011. So it's kind of like, from 2011 to 2019 was like the trial and error period where I
Yeah.
was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out by myself. And podcasts were not a big thing.
Right.
Like YouTube was there, but it wasn't as like
Yep.
saturated with information as it is now. So I just didn't feel like there was a lot, of happening, but I actually went to school to be a teacher. So I had some child psychology and I really love positive parenting. So I felt like, I was doing a good job with parenting
Yeah.
and I was feeling like a lot of people were really struggling with that. So I really did lean heavily into the motherhood piece
Oh,
and that side when I first got started with the purpose gathering. And I still infuse that.
yeah.
But I feel like over time, it has shifted into just finding this harmony between both and really leaning into how to manage your time well.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if any of your listeners can relate, or maybe you can relate to this as well. But when my kids were younger, I felt like I was just counting down the days till they started kindergarten because I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. Like, I'm going to have all this time
Yeah.
on my hands and my business is going to explode. I'm going to be like amazing. And then I
Yep.
sent my youngest off to kindergarten and that did not happen.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
I had all this time and it was just more time for me to waste. It wasn't a time problem, it was a time allocation problem.
Good.
And so then I went down this journey of figuring out, okay, well, I've got all this time on my hands right now and I'm not managing it well. How can I manage it well? And then COVID happened
Oh,
in the middle of my son's kindergarten year.
oh
I was like,
man.
I have been waiting
No.
my whole life for this, and now he's home, like the extended
Oh,
spring break. He
yeah.
never went back. And then I just felt like God was really tugging on my heart to homeschool.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no, I can't do that. So again, I was like, not doing that,
Yep.
ignored the call. And I was like, I'm sending them back. So as soon as I could send them back to public school, they were off back to school. But it just nagged, and it
Yeah.
was like I knew in my heart of hearts that that is what I needed to do, but
Yeah.
there was fear,
Yeah.
like I'm going to put myself right back into that position
Sure.
and I'm going to homeschool on purpose and like this is going to look so different. It's going to be so hard. My business will never grow.
Yeah.
And so that was really a pivotal time when I did decide to homeschool. I was like, okay, I have to learn how to get laser focused. I don't
Yeah.
have very much time, so
Yeah.
I'm going to have to be strategic. And so that's when I really started leaning into time management and systems, which is
Awesome.
now like what I teach in my
Sure.
group coaching program.
Sure. And do you have a team at all? Just out of curiosity.
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I have started to grow a team
Uh-huh.
and actually my assistant is starting to work more hours than I do, which is great.
Oh, great. That's amazing. Yeah. I think that that's like a huge stepping stone because I think a lot of people from the outside looking in can see maybe all the posting that you're doing or all the events that you're hosting and for me
Yeah.
events, but and they're like, how you're so busy. And I cannot stand that word. It literally is like a cuss word to me. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, my whole body cringes because
Right.
like, if you have a productivity ability and you have a
Yeah.
system for it, you're intentional with your time, but you're
Yeah.
not running around with your chicken with your head cut off. Like, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. It's
Right.
over glamorized. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So knowing that and processing through that, what have been the ways in which, like, if you could give people 3 productivity tips that were like,
Mhm.
this helped, what are
Yeah.
some of those things?
Oh, so good. So the very first one is get actual childcare.
Yeah.
Like, stop trying to work in the pockets of time. Please, 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 please. It is so hard. I mean, there's a very special person that can do both, but I would say 99%
Yeah.
of us cannot operate as a mom and a business owner simultaneously at the same time.
Right.
Like,
Right.
we're either resenting our kids
Yeah.
or we're resenting our business, and like
Yeah.
neither of which are helpful or productive. So
Right.
get that protected childcare time, number one. Number two is to be really specific about how you spend your time. So
Yeah.
I talk to my students all the time about creating an ideal week. Like,
Mm.
you do not have to operate out of what your weeks already look like.
Right.
You have the control over your week to totally, completely eliminate everything and start over, right?
Yep.
Like, I know that sporting, sports and extracurriculars, you feel like they're a must, but they're really not.
Yeah.
And like, you get to call the shots. Like in our home, my kids do not do sports at the same time. And we only have
Yeah.
2 kids, so it's easier. But
Yeah.
they alternate seasons.
Wow.
And it's hard. It really
Yeah.
is because, I have to tell my kids no, but
Yeah.
also it's really good for them to hear no and for them to be taught boundaries around their time so that when they grow up, they're not filling every second of their time because that's
So
what
good.
you showed them when they were young.
Well, and
So
that's
that would be number
society
2.
at large too, right? That's a breaking of generational curse, generational bondage of like, this is what you do. And I think we had alluded to this in your episode as we were talking on your show about how generations before us would just kind of brush everything under the table, and they would keep
Yeah.
us so busy that
Mhm.
we didn't have the ability to even feel. So we suppressed our emotions, and we kept
Yeah.
doing all the things that were accolade driven and like checking the boxes because this is the healthy thing, this is the best thing, this is the right thing to do. But there's no time to like actually just rest and be. And
Yeah.
so I love that you're practicing that. So that's number 2. What's number 3?
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanna pop in there before we go
Yeah.
to number 3, and you kind of mentioned this, of filling our time, but I think now even with our kids in our
Yeah.
generation, it's even worse because
Oh yeah.
now they're filling their time with screens, and they're
Mm,
not understanding how I'm really passionate about screen time, like, they're not understanding how to articulate emotion, they're not
yeah.
understanding how to be bored because, we're so easily just being like, "Oh, go put on a show, go play your video games." And we're missing this really human component with our families that I'm just really passionate about helping moms avoid.
So
Right. And
good.
it's not a shame thing. It's not like, oh, you
Yeah.
should never let your kids watch TV or play video games. But it's again, it's that time allocation. How
Yeah.
much time is appropriate to allow our kids to be on screens, and how much time should we actually be spending with them? And that's one thing that homeschooling has really kind of brought to light for me is all of the things that my kids were struggling with that I
Yeah.
didn't know about because they were at school most of the time.
Right.
And
Wow.
when they were home, it was like, well, let's get the laundry done and let's get this done,
Yes.
pack your lunches. And it was just like, go, go, go. There was never enough time for me to just
Yeah.
slow down and be like, oh, wow, you really struggle with math. Like, how
Yeah.
did I not know that? Or you really are struggling with this inner like critic and you are can't sleep at night because you're
Mhm.
anxious. Like, how did
Mhm.
I not catch that kind of stuff? But when
Yeah.
we don't slow down to be in tune with what our kids need or even what we need, it's really hard for us to know kind of how to
Yeah.
navigate from there.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's a constant conversation in our home because the devices, especially as a mompreneur, that can become a clutch. Like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm going to do this. So you have an hour to do this because I'm on this. They also
Mhm.
see my whole life is on a screen.
Same.
Like
Yep.
literally, I'm constantly just like this. And
Mhm.
so for me to then just say no screen time, they feel like it's unfair. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to express to them like, mommy is, yes, I'm having an amazing time. And I am
Mhm.
talking with my friends and we're playing. We're not playing a game per se,
Yeah.
but we are playing life and
Yeah.
enjoying these conversations. But they have a hard time like with the cognitive dissonance of why can you do it versus I can't do it, and why is it
Right.
okay for you to do it versus not. And
Mhm.
honestly, there are days where I am like, I can't wait to unplug, right?
Yeah.
And they see that and they know that that's something I crave. And so just being in constant conversation too, I'm like, what is healthy and what is okay during this season versus that season? We're about to come into holiday season and we have
Yeah.
a strict no devices during the week rule. And so
Mhm.
they don't get Monday through Friday, no access to devices. And then it'll be a Saturday or Sunday. And then they just want to like binge. And I'm like,
Mhm.
you cannot also do that. And we're about to go
Yeah.
into holiday season. I don't want them to binge because I'm also working. So
Yeah.
creating these rhythms where like, I don't actually have to work just because the rest of the world is working. I don't actually have to do that during that week or the next week or the week after. And so
Yeah.
processing through that and finding the pockets of time that I have ample energy, because I think that's an important part is also understanding your energy levels when you're
Yeah.
creating your productivity schedule. If you're best for your kids and like that's their synergy moment is in the morning, you
Yeah.
probably have to find either earlier time to do your work or early enough that you're still not dragging by the end of the day.
Right.
So I love the work that you do. And I think a lot of people don't put enough intentionality behind
Mhm.
that. And then they get into the place of shame cycles and
Yeah.
regret. Like that mom guilt is so real in this community, even
Yeah.
especially for us who travel a lot.
Mhm.
Have you had any conversations about that around mom guilt, and what are some ways that you can kind of eliminate those things? Because I do think that's from the enemy in most regard, but I
Yeah.
also think that there can be some sweet Holy Spirit conviction inside of said scenario.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that talking about mom guilt, there's two types that I like to talk about. It's the constructive guilt and the
Mhm.
destructive guilt,
Good.
right? And so there's constructive guilt, which is conviction, right? Which is like you ask yourself,
Yep.
why am I feeling guilty? Is it
Yeah.
because I'm, like say for example, that you're feeling guilty that you're working too much?
Yep.
Like, is that true? Are you really working too much? Or are you just not taking the time to spend intentional time with your kids?
Yeah.
Right. But I think so often a lot of us, we just beat ourselves up and we focus on all of the, things that are not going well. And that's destructive guilt. So that's actually not going to do anything for you. That's not going to change anything. It could be guilt from other people that they're putting on you, and now you feel guilty. But
Yes.
again, that's not constructive unless they're trying to help you, right? If they're
Yeah.
trying to just make you feel like you're a horrible person, and whoever that's coming from, your mom, your sister, your husband, whatever,
Yep. Yep.
like whoever it's coming from, if it's not out of a place of like, hey, I think you're working too much, I really think you need to pull back, like that. And again, should be that conviction, that
Yeah.
constructive guilt that's actually going to propel you to do something different. But if
Good.
it's just making you feel terrible, and you realize like, no, that's not really what's happening, that's just their perception, that's when you can just let that go and be like, well, I cannot change the way that they feel about this situation, but now I know that it's not something that is in my control. It's
Yes.
it's really on them.
Yes, that's really good. And I think that like looking to those lenses is important because it can come from a lot of different ways. And like you said earlier in the conversations of who is in your inner circle, you need to lend yourself to the ear and the eyes of the conversation of the person who is walking a similar journey as you, right?
Mhm.
Because if it's just the moms, they're going to think you're bananas and always busy and not giving your kids enough attention. And
Right.
if it's just the entrepreneur, they're going to think you're not spending enough time doing this and you better keep on hustling because
Right.
you need to work till 4 a.m. Right? Because
Mhm.
you're never going to get to where I'm getting if you don't do it at this particular pace.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things when we talk about biblical business building and we talk about the rhythms of grace that the Lord provides and his yoke is easy and his burden is light, does not mean that things aren't hard, does
Yeah.
not mean that there is not grit connected to it, does not mean that we don't have to flex our muscles in that process. And so, how do you infuse your faith into how you're teaching? And are you doing that faith forward or faith founded? Because I think there's a
Mm.
variation, but neither is wrong, neither is
Yeah.
right. But how have you decided to do it with the Lord?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I love how you said that. So I
Yeah.
think that I have been teaching out of faith founded, but I want to
Mm,
transition into faith forward,
love that.
because what I have noticed is when I coach people, I cannot not say
Yes.
like,
Right.
but how's your walk with the Lord? Like, how
Yes.
are you spending your time? And when I know people, are a Christian and they have
Yep.
that faith, like it's so much easier for me to
Sure.
coach them. And when they
Yes.
don't, I'm like, okay, so out of your own strength,
Yeah.
here's what
Yeah.
we're gonna try. Like, it's
Yeah.
just so hard for me, and I have,
Awkward.
like, really
Yeah.
realized that I'm, like,
Yeah.
I am just, like, hiding, like
Yes.
that song, that, nursery song that you, like, learned to, like, hide under a bushel? "No, I'm
Yes.
gonna let it shine." Like, that's literally how I feel right now, where I'm
That's
like,
so
I've
great.
just been hiding under this bushel, now I'm
Yeah.
like, "No." Like,
Yes.
"I'm so sorry, like, I just can't hold it in
That's
anymore."
so
Like,
good.
can't hold it
Yeah,
in anymore.
yeah. Well, and
I'm like,
it's transformational. It's a transformational tool. Like it's like the eternal tool that we all need.
yeah.
And I think what's beautiful is like the example of one of my girlfriends who's on our Girls Gone Holy podcast. She became TikTok famous basically overnight by posting her second video she ever posted on TikTok went completely millions viral. She ended up landing on the Kelly Clarkson show, and it was just this whole thing, but it was around motherhood because basically she pushed her kids on a sled in the middle of the winter and they ended up going so far that they started screaming as they're going down the road and they like went down onto the road and she's like, oh my gosh, and like running over to get them. So like she had no plan for a platform. She loved Jesus, but she found that everybody that came in were like parents and moms. So she started to build this entire platform and not necessarily a persona because it's who she was. It's a facet of who she is. And eventually, especially in connection with me, really seeing and feeling that same sense of like, I want to let it shine. But she was a little bit concerned that like, what if I lose all my followers? And
Mhm.
it was one of those amazing conversations to just be like, but what if you don't? And
Mhm.
what if you're the tool and the vessel that they needed? And because they've trusted you for this many years, sharing about, because you, like you said, you don't not share, you're just not
Yeah.
forward in it.
Yeah.
And she did the shift and it's been amazing. And same thing, she feels so free in it
Yeah.
because there's no blocking. It's like wearing a mouth guard, right? Or like wearing
Yes.
a muzzle. Oh,
Uh-huh.
I can't say that because I don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty that like Jesus came and he was
Mhm.
unoffendable, but he also said, I come to offend. I came to
Yeah.
separate people with the sword. And
Right.
so I think that there's going to be such a fruitfulness that occurs on the other side of that. And you're really going to step into what I always call like marketplace ministry. Like
Mhm.
that's what you get to do. And we do get to have a fruitful life on the other side of it. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see that happen and see, the Bible verses flung over top of everything and just like what
Yes.
that's going to mean for people as they break free. So
Thank
I'm
you.
curious, Ashley, because you started as a photographer, do you feel like a lot of the people that you're coaching from a business lens are still coming in with that background, or have you kind of
Mhm.
detached from that altogether?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I actually this is actually a pivotal moment that I think is really
Mhm.
important to share. So I actually went into business, right, with the purpose gathering with
Yep.
the mom business owner in mind.
Right.
And then over time, different people spoke into my life and persuaded my decision to niche specifically to talk to mom photographers.
Okay.
And there was always a slight like disconnect for me where I was
Mhm.
like, I mean, but I really feel called to the like the mompreneur, like just the
Yeah.
mom that owns a business. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if she's a photographer.
Yeah.
But I went down this road for probably like 2.5, 3 years,
Oh, wow. That's a
maybe
long
even
time.
more. I got to do
Yeah.
the math on this. But like, so in March, I just made the decision to not niche anymore. So I had
That.
decided, I'm talking to mom business owners, and then I niched to the organized mom photographer. And
Uh-huh.
so my whole coaching program that I built, I
Oh,
actually had the side hustler to CEO, which was
okay.
specific to photographers. Then I
Okay.
created another one called the efficient mom photographer. So they were
Uh-huh.
they overlapped a little bit.
Sure.
But then, God is speaking to me, and
Yep.
he's like, I went to this wellness retreat and I just had this breakthrough that I need to serve mom business owners, not
Yeah.
just the photographer anymore. So since March, that's when I pivoted again to the efficient
Yes.
mompreneur and the organized mompreneur podcast.
Mm.
And it's been so expansive because I'm like,
Oh,
this is where I was supposed to be. And
yes.
had I stayed the course,
Yeah.
even when people were
Mhm.
telling me,
Mhm.
you really should niche down. But,
Mhm.
who knows? I might not be where I am today without
Yeah.
that. So
Sure.
it's like
Sure.
all part of the journey.
It is.
But yeah, so I do have, a lot of photographers that are
Yeah.
still in my coaching program, but I'm
Sure.
attracting new people too, like
Yeah.
coaches. And, I
Cool.
have one girl who doesn't really know what she wants to do. She just wants to do something. And we think
Cool.
we've narrowed in on a 501 nonprofit for her. And
Awesome.
yeah, I'm super
That's
excited. So
huge.
there's lots of different people that I've
Yeah.
been attracting now, which just feels so,
Yeah.
so aligned.
Well, and it's also exciting. Like, right, we can get into the own monotony of like, this is what I do, this is what I say, this is how I teach every time. But when there's different, gifts and talents being presented and also different ideations and ways that they can execute, if you're only helping a photographer, there's only so many ways that they can execute. Where now you get to talk about nonprofits and for profits and, side hustles all the way to their full-time careers. And what does that look like? And you're still talking about the productivity piece and the motherhood piece, which really allows you to show up as your whole self every single time, which is really something we advocate for here because society tells us to like silo ourselves off just
Mhm,
as much as this niche or niche idea. And I always go to the Bible in that. I'm like, did Jesus niche? And I'm like,
mhm,
oh, he didn't. He was for everyone. He hung out with the tax collectors. He hung out with the Pharisees. He hung out with the least of these, the fishermen. Like he was with everyone. He was with men and women, all different nationalities. And so I freely from the very beginning was like, I'm not niching. I'm not doing it.
mhm,
And initially I did only really serve women, and that was based out of a safety space with my own story. And I kept getting guys asking, hey, can you help? Can you help? Can you help? And eventually, about 2 years in, me and my husband had a conversation and we both felt really good about the type of men that the Lord was bringing to the conversations were really this like wholesome people that I wanted to help. And so we tried it out and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So even though my brand serves a mass majority, like 80% women, we do have 20% men. And they're some of my favorite people that I get to work with because it's a total different energetic experience. And the people in which have come to the table have taught me, they like end up being mentors to me in some way as well. So it's really, really special to be able to open that up and to engage with yourself in ways you didn't know that you wanted to do. So I just feel like there's so much expansion for you, even with this event that you're going to put on next April. Like you've opened up the doors. So like the 100 people, let's go. I totally see that in line for you. And it's a matter of just getting that continued message out there. So talk to us about that process, because there's people here are listening through the lens of like, how do I apply what she did to me? So maybe not niching is one of them. Maybe the 3 tips of productivity is something you want to apply today. Maybe there's more of that work-life rhythm that you want to design. But when you talk to like the fundamentals, you spoke about an event, then you spoke about the podcast, you spoke about e-courses and coaching. And so can you kind of tell us like, what's the systematic build for the internal structure of how your corporation or business works?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And then don't let me forget to circle back to number 3, because I never told you the third productivity hack.
Okay.
But I don't want to forget the question. So you asked like the internal like business structure, like how my business works. Okay, cool. So I have an in-person component to the purpose gathering. It's called the Collective. And my bigger vision that the Lord has given me is to create chapters all across the US so that other women can be a part of the Purpose Gathering Collective in person. Because I feel like there's just such a different energy when you meet in person than when you meet like virtually in a room. So I do have that in-person component, the Collective, and then I have my group coaching program called the Efficient Mompreneur. And so that has a e-course or like, a self-paced course with it, and then a whole year of implementation and lots of, coaching and accountability that goes with it. And then in addition to that, I'm going to be having these yearly events. And then my goal is again to like have smaller retreats and smaller workshops and things, because there's just, I light up in a room with people. And I love being able to be on Zoom like this, but like it would be so much different if we were in the same room. Like there's just the energy exchange is different. Like I'm just all about in person. And so that's really where my heart is. And I would say, I think you mentioned this earlier, I don't know, made me think of this, but like something that I do to like stay rooted or grounded or something that I've learned along the way is really to tune in to my own intuition and to really use, what God is infusing and what God is calling me to do, and to always filter everything through that lens. Versus like me just listening to trusted mentors or listening to podcasts and then, getting that shiny object syndrome of like, oh, but they're doing this, so that's what I should be doing. And so I actually started implementing what I call a business meeting with God. And I actually learned about it from a book called Grace Over Grind.
I love Shay. She's been on the podcast. She's amazing.
Oh, I love her book. It literally changed my dynamic. And
I'll connect you too.
Mentions, yes, I would love that. She mentions that in her book of doing a business meeting with God. So I started one. I've been doing one every single work block since June. And it's just like, I mean, I literally don't have lack of clarity anymore because I literally sit down, I journal, I kind of do a brain dump for 10 minutes. I do reflection and gratitude for 5 minutes of what I'm grateful for. And then I just listen to the Lord speak for 5 minutes. And like the first month, I didn't hear much. It was kind of like just words and some scriptures, popping up in my head. And now I get full paragraph downloads.
Wow.
Like him speaking exactly to me of what I need to do. And it's like, wow, like my business has been lacking the direction of the Lord. And I thought that I was doing business with God the whole time, and I was not.
Praise God. That's so awesome. She's going to love this testimony, and I can't wait. She's got to get on your show. I was actually writing down a couple of different people that I want to connect you with in my community. That's one of my passions, is just to bring people together. So Tiffany, Elisa Cardi, who has Gals That Brunch. It's a worldwide community that all meets, just like you were saying, for the collective. And she's phenomenal at creating community across, I think she's in like 176 countries. Like, it's awesome. And it
That's
started
amazing.
right here in my backyard in Virginia Beach. So she's someone I want to connect you with. And then the other person is a gal who has a podcast, who's writing a book on the topic of Unjuggle the Struggle. And it's very much about that like productivity piece, but also like living into your pursuit, and specifically around mompreneurs. And so I know that this was such a divine conversation for us to have today, and just to be connected. So is the God business plans, is that time with God, that strategic time, is that the third productivity hack?
No, but it should be.
Okay.
My third productivity hack.
Okay, let me hear
I
that.
know. The third productivity hack that I like always start with is prioritizing yourself.
Yeah.
And really, I think a lot of moms want to skip that part. And they don't think it's productive. But honestly, if I've learned anything this past year, it's that rest is productive.
Yeah.
And that when you slow down, you actually give yourself the time, energy, and space to speed up. But not in a reckless way, in a like, I'm just super aligned, I know what we're doing, let's go kind of way. And so that's what I would suggest for anyone that's listening who thinks like, oh, I just need the next strategy. You know, I just need to know that one thing that's going to just, you know, that's actually the podcast episode I'm going to record after this for my own show, is like, you don't need another business strategy, right? You need to prioritize yourself. You need to start learning how to trust your own intuition. You need to learn how to start, you know, bringing God in on your decisions. And you need to stop second guessing and waiting for perfection, and just do it. Just take action. And then he will provide the next step, right?
Yes.
We just have to be in motion.
Clarity in action. I always tell people that, because that's what they're looking for. They're like, I want clarity. I'm like, well, move, and you'll find out. You'll find out if it's like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Great. Then pivot, then go the other direction. And God's there to like walk that line with you. And I think that's where a lot of people are like afraid. What if I do something that doesn't like bless the Lord? Well, you were never going to know until you take a step. And obviously you're walking with a postured heart of integrity and all of the other pieces that are of good nature. When you take said step, you're not doing something devious. And at the same time, like, he's going to meet you. He's before you and behind you and beside you. And that's the most exciting part about being a faith-filled entrepreneur. So I'm curious, if I was to like ask you, what is the message that you want to turn into a movement of all the things that you shared? Because there's been some beauty points. What would you say is the message that you want to turn into a movement?
I think my biggest message, like if I could just like put it on a billboard, it would be like, you can be a present mom and grow a wildly profitable business.
Yes. So good. And I think that should be on a billboard in Times Square, in fact, which we're going to be in soon. And so we have a book coming out about the joyful entrepreneurship. It's our volume 3, and it's about combating the lies that happen and the lies that we tell ourselves. And it's like renewing, transforming our minds, right? And utilizing that Bible verse connected to how we can show up to transform the world when our minds are renewed, which goes back to the self-care first. But is there a lie that you believe, that you potentially are still believing, that needs to be broken for you to really break free and turn this into a movement?
I think that it needs to be like perfect, you know, like, oh, I just need to like nail the messaging and then it will work. And it's like, what does that look like? I think that's my lie.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think a lot of people say like, I'm a recovering perfectionist, or I'm a recovering people pleaser. And I always tell people when they struggle with perfectionism, because I did for so long, that there's a huge variation between having perfect, like for you, versus chasing after the perfect one. And I think that every single one of us has this need or desire for perfection, but it cannot be found in our own efforts, and it cannot be found on this side of heaven unless Jesus is, you know, you're having an encounter with him, or you're having a business meeting with the Lord. And you're like, man, this is so good. This is so perfect. And that is where the business planning and really walking out faith-driven entrepreneurship is what we do here and how we do it. So I'm excited for this, and it's such a need. I'm excited about your conference. You guys, all of the links to all of these things that she's mentioning are going to be connected. You know where to find them. But Ashley, if you were to encourage or invite somebody into something you're offering right now, what would that look like?
Oh, awesome. So one of my favorite things to do is to connect with people via text messaging. So I
Yeah.
have a text messaging service that I love. And so I would love for you to be on my text message insider list. So you will be able to hear all about my podcasts when they drop. I also
Yes.
do free virtual hangouts. I'm trying to do them monthly
Cool.
just so that we can talk about some of the topics on my podcast for that month and really dig deep into some of the struggles that you might be having.
Right.
So I'll give you the link, but it's
Please.
thepurposegathering.com/insider.
Great.
And I literally text people back. Like, I love that so
Yes.
much. It's my favorite way to connect.
I love that. And so we'll get the links to all of that. You guys want access. And I think sometimes we can get inundated with like the text, but imagine if somebody actually texts you back. Wouldn't you be
Mhm.
much more excited to engage with what it is that they
Yeah.
were sharing? And it's so much more handy because I follow a lot of shows on my podcast apps that I listen to. And I follow so many shows that I am like, oh my gosh, there's like 12 to listen to today. And it goes back to what you said before, like, you need to just spend time with the Lord and like let him give you the divine strategy
Yeah.
or no strategy, but more
Mhm.
just that being and resting in what you're already doing very effectively and honing in on some of
Yeah.
those things. I'm raising my hand to that because that's
Mhm.
where I'm at right now. Is like, Tamara, you don't need to do anything more. You need
Yeah.
to craft and define and
Yeah.
refine the things that you're already doing to make them that much more excellent, that much more
Yeah.
perfect, because that's what he wants us to do. So
Yeah.
I love this, Ashley. I've had so much fun hanging out with you today. I can't wait to be both of our podcasts. Hopefully, we can get them to drop around the same time. That would be awesome since we're alluding to both
Yeah.
the entire time. But be
Absolutely.
sure to follow Ashley in all the places. I know I've enjoyed that, and it's going to be so much more fun now that I get to know you more to be able to get ingrained into your community.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right. We'll chat soon, guys. Don't forget to take your message and turn it into a movement. Now you have a lot of hacks in order to do it. Thanks, Ashley. Bye, y'all.